Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Product Marketing Misunderstood. For this next session, I am joined by the fantastic Harvey Lee. So to get us going today, Harvey, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey to your current position, and ultimately a time in your career when you really felt that product marketing has been misunderstood, and why?
Well, thank you, Rose, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about this important topic. What career history? Where do I start? In the 80s, in the 90s. I guess I started in product marketing officially in some sort of capacity in the mid 90s when I was in the music industry, actually. But before that, as with most people, I was probably doing product marketing or things that were associated with product marketing beforehand without even having the title. So as with most people, I started not in the product marketing sphere, but I started in other categories or other businesses, doing other things. And actually I started my music business industry career in the 80s, from a business and a creative side, not in product marketing per se. But I suppose the road to product marketing started there because towards the end of my career in the music industry, I ended up working for record labels, working in marketing and business management and so on and so forth. And that's where I sort of got my first introduction to a lot of the elements that we consider product marketing today. Fast forward many, many years, I suppose that my first official product marketing role was towards the end of the 90s, working for Virgin as a product marketing manager, looking after the US portfolio. And then in the early 2000s, well, actually 2001, I joined Microsoft. So in a product marketing role on the Xbox team, and I was there for 12 years, did pre-launch from the first Xbox all the way through to the Xbox One and everything else in between. And then I switched gears and moved into the cybersecurity industry on the consumer side at Kaspersky Lab as the director of product marketing globally there. More recently, I've worked for Epson on the print division and worked for Avast, who are one of the largest cybersecurity firms in the world, heading up the product marketing effort for their new Avast One proposition. And more recently, I've become a product marketing consultant. So working for myself with private clients and so on and so forth. So it's been a long journey. I've been doing it for product marketing officially for 25 years, probably a little bit longer in reality. But I don't think that story is any different from many others in terms of my pathway into it, which is rich and varied, you know. In terms of the misunderstanding of product marketing, well, I think, talking to those in the community and colleagues and peers, it's very clear that it's a big problem. And it's a good problem to have, in that if product marketing as a function or as a discipline wasn't growing in the way that it is, then nobody would be talking about it, right? So from that point of view, if we look at the perspective from that angle, it's the kind of problem you want to have, right? But to understand why it's misunderstood, I think it's helpful to have a little potted history of marketing in general, right? And I think it breaks down into three main areas: sort of how marketing and brand marketing came about, how the marketing function as a department has been dispersed or fragmented over the years, especially in the past 10 to 20 years, I would say, since the the introduction of the internet as an important part of our lives. And then the third part is really, how do we frame product marketing today to get it to be more understandable as a concept, not just for employers and for organizations, but also for ourselves, as professionals. So, so we go back to the beginning of that and we think about the history of marketing. Well, yeah, I mean, it started in the early 1930s in Cincinnati with Procter & Gamble and Neil McElroy sort of really inventing brand marketing as we know it today, which came out of category management, around all the big consumer brands that they had at the time, ironically, some of which are still hugely popular today. And, I did a PMA webinar on career development about a year ago. And the case study that I put in that was actually, if you look at the 5 key steps that he introduced as what he called the brand man. We'd say the brand person now, wouldn't we? But the brand man in 1931. There's nothing that's different from what a product marketer would do today, right? Even going back to 1931, the development of research, look deeply inside the category, the formation of plans, the retrospective of going back, looking at what results were, the reiteration of future plans, so on and so forth, the sort of 5 key points that he laid out. And then if we fast forward through all the ages of the Industrial Revolution, consumerism, the age of distribution, the age of information, as these ages get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, we end up sort of closer to where we are today with the age of the internet, or the age of information, as we would call it. And that took 20 years. And really, the product marketing function has been born out, if you like, of the internet. I mean, I was in it pre-internet, so I remember what mail merge on a 286 IBM machine used to look like, and have to use a computer without a mouse and function buttons. So I've been there, right? But the reality of it is the way that we as a community look at, and many businesses look at product marketing today, is as a B2B SaaS function. I mean, if we look at the state of product marketing report, not just the most recent one, but actually most of them, all 3 of them, over 90% in that report cite product marketing as a purely B2B SaaS function, right? And that wouldn't exist without the internet. It wouldn't exist without the age of information. So it brings us really to the dispersion of marketing as a function of the fragmentation of it, because since the internet has become, I'll say, pivotal in our lives, almost a utility in our lives that we can't live without, water, electricity, gas, internet. It's in that list now, right? The marketing department has looked completely different, right? So the marketing department of yonder years, of years gone back, would have just been one department responsible for everything, right? Now we have multiple departments under the banner of marketing, regardless of what title you want to use or what banner you want to use, whether they're the digital marketers or the performance marketers or the growth marketers or whatever you want to call it. Then we've got the product marketers, then we've got marketing communications, and then PR sort of gets lost in there somewhere, which used to be, in the old-fashioned marketing department. So we have this fragmentation of the marketing department, of which we're now part of. We're one of the fragmented pieces. But the challenge for most organizations and people in organizations is they understand quite fundamentally where quite a lot of these other pieces sit, because it's quite tangible to them. So marketing now is shorthand for campaigns, right? Generally speaking, it didn't used to be. It used to be everything, which means they don't do segmentation, they don't do positioning, there's a lot of stuff they don't do. I once heard them call the colouring in department. It's like they're there for doing campaigns, right? I don't mean that disingenuously. And then we have the performance of the digital folks who are optimizing, converting on the web, et cetera, et cetera. We understand that, that's tangible. But product marketing as an understandable concept is still not that well understood, as we know, in the context of everybody else's role within the marketing department. And the reason that I talk about the marketing department so much is that, back to that report, the State of Product Marketing report, 70% of product marketers report to the marketing department, right? So it's relevant. The dispersion or fragmentation of the marketing department is relevant.
Absolutely.
And where does that lead us today? Well, it leads us in a strong position because as a function, it's growing tangibly in the most recent years, sort of 2 to 5 years so well, but it hasn't fixed the problem. We're not that much closer to organizations really understanding tangible value, right? So, for some organizations, they think a product marketer is a marketer who does all the marketing for a product, including campaigns, right? Or in some, it's purely executional. And for some, it's purely strategic, or they understand the growth value from the strategic delivery for a senior product marketer. But the reality is it's all of these things and more. So how do we put a frame around how we think about it? And the way that I do it is, and through the PMA scholars and the PMA core certification program that I teach live, as you know, the way that I put it together is on a 2x2 grid. So if we take region location responsibility, so we take a global or a head office function at the top, think about a 2x2 grid like this at the top, and then regional responsibility at the bottom. So that could be country specific responsibility, or pan-regional, like Latin America, Europe, Asia Pac. For this exercise, it's all the same. So we've got head office, and then we've got everyone else, which is regions. And then on the other axis, going across left to right, we've got strategic and we've got tactical or execution. And the reality of it is there's no one definition of product marketing that fits within that 2x2 grid, right? Because when I mapped my own career on it, I quickly learned a couple of things, especially when I mapped my tenure, which was I seem to have spent 80% of my career in head office roles, leaning more towards strategic delivery, right? So we've got regional responsibility and we've got actual responsibility around delivery. So head office and strategic seem to be where I lean, although I've had roles that were more regional and more executional, where I spent less of my career, ironically. And what I learned from this was that as I looked at the 4 quadrants, there's no one definition that solves for them all. Mm-hmm. Right? That's where I came to. And I thought, well, there's at least 2 or 3 definitions that are variations on a theme. So there's commonality in what we do around positioning and messaging, definition of value, articulation of value, and conveying that to the market, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of our jobs are very colored by the context in which we're in. And that context is, do you work for a multinational? Are you part of a bigger team? Are you working for a startup? And if so, at what stage? And are you the only product marketer? So when you overlay this layer of context, it again muddies the waters again. It's like it changes it. And the definition of those product marketers, whether they're a head office person, a regional person, whether they're tasked with strategy or tactics, takes on another layer of context, right? So it's just another layer of complexity into the definition. So I think the reality of it is that you're either responsible for the whole world or you're responsible for a bit of it. If you're responsible for the whole world, you're more likely to be strategic, especially if you're in a bigger company. If you're responsible for the whole world and you're the only product marketer in a startup, you're more likely to be doing everything, and then it's harder to prioritize, right? Where should I sit between strategy and tactics? So how do I think of my definition, right? And then there's the company context of what they think it is, right? And it wouldn't be the first time where I've had to educate an organization that I already worked for about how to frame the context of how to get the best value out of the function. But most organizations don't think of it in that way. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks of it in that way, but I think it makes sense.
No, I think it's great to kind of think about your own career history and how that maps out, and then how that might translate across companies of all different sizes. Yeah, I think it can tell us a lot. And you were mentioning, obviously, as one of our valued experts and residents here at PMA, that you've taken a number of early stage product marketers through both the core certification and our scholars program and things like that. But what advice do you like to pass on to those students that you're coaching through, the future budding product marketers, to help them ensure that they can make an impact and prove value in an entry-level role? I mean, yeah, like you said, sometimes it's quantity over quality almost with the product marketing role.
It's difficult because especially for the product marketers starting out, right? It's like one of the questions I get often in the community is, where do I start? It's like, I have this endless amount of demands on my time. And I'm like a rabbit in headlights, right? So I think there's 3 or 4 key elements which I think that we can frame this around. The first one is we have to be really focused about what is valuable within the context that you're in. So one of the things I think that we need to move away from is understanding that there's one rule of thumb for everyone and everything, because there isn't. You know, product marketing is one of those roles, if not, I don't say the only role, but it's one of those roles where it's so contextual, depending on what's going on and who you're working for, and being able to understand what's going on with a real wide peripheral vision is really helpful. So being focused on the context that you're in, what is the company trying to achieve? Where are they now? What kind of capability do they have? What assets do I have? What skills do I have? What are the gaps? You know, asking yourself all these kind of questions to determine, right down to distill it down to something that really is tangible is helpful. But there is, you know, the next point I want to make is that there is all too often, especially in the startup community, and especially where I'd say that the product marketing team is less than 3, but more likely to be 1 or 2, right? Is that all too often there's such an immediate pressure to execute on product marketers in that context. And I think it's grossly unfair. Because what are they supposed to execute? Okay, I get it that, you know, the organization that they work for, we need growth, we need product growth, we need product adoption, we need revenue. I get all of that. But there's no tactics without strategy, right? So if whoever's in that role isn't given the time to develop and understand the market through segmentation, choiceful targeting, positioning, and therefore all the other things that flow on from there, developing persona portraits, great articulated messaging, so on and so forth, then more often than not, that execution or those tactics that they're going to execute are at risk of being considered throwing up as much mud against the wall and seeing what sticks with a blindfold on, right? So that's why you can't have tactics without strategy. And so that pressure to execute as soon as you come in, unfortunately, you know, quells that quite dramatically. And as a junior product marketer or product marketer in one of your first jobs, it's like, I know a lot of people feel bad about challenging the organization. So, well, hold on a minute. I think there's a better way to do this and we can be more effective. Especially when it's a sort of kitchen sink type operation where you've just got to do everything, right? How do you determine you can't do everything? So how do you prioritize? So I think resisting the pressure to execute immediately if you're in a new role is something whilst you diagnose your context, right? And then I think the last point on this one, and I know it's a really dry topic, and you know, Lord knows, you know, I've had my own dry experiences of these before, but OKRs can be a really useful tool to help us bring clarity and lay the guide rails for us and the organization down. There's a couple of reasons why I think the OKRs, or sometimes in organizations they're called MBOs, but most people call them OKRs these days, is really important, and how it can help product marketers, you know, be impactful. Well, first of all, if you do the OKRs, if you embrace the process, right, and set meaningful objectives, then what you're basically doing is once you get into the communication part of those OKRs, you're telling the organization what is a priority, and you're also by default telling them what isn't, right? So if it's not on this list, it's either not getting done or it's not a priority, right? So that's why communication of these things is really, really important. But all too often that doesn't happen. So the communication of OKRs is usually where things fall down. Okay, I did my OKRs, really happy with it. My manager's happy with it, but the rest of the organization doesn't know. Therefore, they don't know what product marketing's priorities are, i.e. what value we're going to deliver, right? As a consequence. So I think it's really important to embrace the process around OKRs and get pretty good at it if you can, right? Because I think that you'll benefit from it once it's done. I'm not saying it's the most fun to do, and it's certainly not the most fun thing as a product marketer to do, but I think it is up there in terms of importance and impact.
Absolutely. And that really leads us nicely onto our final point. And obviously the book Product Marketing and MisUnderstood that we're working on really aims to equip our readers with the knowledge and techniques they need to not only establish their authority, but elevate that strategic value that you've been talking about so clearly. And with those kind of OKRs and key metrics in mind, what are some of those metrics that you would recommend product marketers can track so they can really prove that value to senior leadership to kind of take the next step?
Yeah, I get this a lot as well in the community, you know, in the weekly workshops with core and scholars and the programs that we teach. And my immediate response to folks who ask that question is, it's not up to me to tell you what metrics that you need to be governed by, but those metrics should be governed by the objectives that you've set, right? So my short answer is, it just depends, which frustrates people because they're like, you're not giving me a direct answer. And I said, and I usually meet that with, yes, I'm deliberately not giving you a direct answer. But they're relevant to the objectives that they're governed by, right? So whatever your objective is, they should be the relevant metrics that constitute or make up success in that context, right? But there are things that we can do to set out the measurability in a more structured, solid way. And I think, you know, the SMART framework is a really, really good, actionable way to get it down on paper, even digital paper or real paper, or in the internet, or however you want to get it written down, just get it written down, right? And the SMART framework, I think if you're a P&A member, there's a great SMART framework template in the membership templates plan. So we're setting out things that are specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. And if you operate within that framework, right, the measurement, it will come to you. So the M part of SMART, you know, the measurable part is, what number are we starting from and want to move to? But then you get the context within that and when you're going to deliver it. So again, it's a little bit more work up front, but by using that style, by going with that style of work or using those kind of tools, such as the SMART framework, they're very, very powerful enabler to sort of staple on the back of your objectives and say, and this is how we're going to measure everything we do, right? And that's really how a lot of HR departments look at things. So if you think about tools like SuccessFactors, which is, well, it's now owned by SAP, they use the SMART framework within their HR tool. So it's a very standard, weighty method in which to do it. But whether your company uses those kind of HR tools or not, I would encourage product marketers to use it anyway offline, because I think that you're going to have impacts with your line manager and your superiors to say, this is how I look at how I measure myself and how I determine success, right? And it's not just about the M part, it's about the specificity, the actionability, and, you know, making sure people know when things are going to be delivered. So it gives the full context around it. So I think that it'll be very powerful as a product marketer to put that in front of leadership. In terms of the actual number itself, what should I be measuring? Well, I can give you some guidance. They should be product-led, depending on your job description and what you're responsible for. They should be sales-related, again, back to the product or service that you're responsible for. And wherever product marketing has a contribution to play, or you have a contribution to play, and there should be bottom line hard numbers that affect the P&L. So revenue related, but make sure, and I'll finish on this key point, and this is really important though, is that when you're signing up for a number that's revenue related, right, more often than not, that number is going to have a shared responsibility. So I once had a VP come to me, not so long ago actually, and he said, I want your OKR, here's your OKRs or MBOs for the up and coming year. And he gave me 4 data points. And it was like, one was volume, one was revenue, one was market share, and I think one was inventory of some type. And I looked at it and went, these are not OKRs. These are KPIs. These are unguided KPIs. So what I did with that was, you know, I thought, well, this is a share. I'm not responsible for millions and tens of millions of dollars of revenue on my own. I'm here to make a contribution to that. And I will determine which objectives I think product marketing can identify that are valuable to feed up into that. But I'm not solely responsible for those revenue numbers. I do hear in the community some people are tasked like that. And the guidance I give people is, make the case to have those kind of revenue metrics as a shared objective in the organization, because you're all jointly responsible for it, right? Or else nobody gets paid, you know, the utilities don't get paid. We all have a shared responsibility for that. We shouldn't have 100% responsibility for it. So think about those kind of numbers as a shared contribution, and they should be weighted, right? And also the last point is around attribution. So everything that you choose to do, or everything that you think is a good idea to do in terms of those objectives, have a think about who else is going to contribute to that and what that attribution should be. And it's not that controversial to say that, you know, we should be rewarded for our work, but the challenge is it usually only occurs to people after the fact, right? So they think, oh, well, I did that campaign and I should have had 20% of that. And it's like, it's been and gone. It's just done. The reality of it is that when we're thinking about attribution, it has to be done through the OKR process before it's signed off, right? You have to negotiate it all up front so that you can put it in your SMART framework and then it's go time, right? But it can't be reverse engineered unless you want a bun fight in the office, which I don't recommend for anyone. But so those are my guidances around metrics. Again, it's just one of those answers that it just depends, but hopefully it's giving you some sort of framework to think about the thought process about how we can get to that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with kind of defining those key metrics and the route to achieving those revenue goals and things like that. You know, product marketing is uniquely positioned between sales, marketing, product, customer success, and everyone has a role to play. And I think having that, like, you know, those North Star metrics that you're working towards and filtering down between every role in the company as well is an absolute recipe for success.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Harvey. Insightful as ever, and hopefully lots of knowledge kind of passed on there. We will be right back with another session with Product Marketing Misunderstood. So stay tuned. Thanks.
Welcome.